Well, hello everyone. My name is Pat, and I'm talking to you from Ottawa today. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to this meeting. Today I'm going to talk to you about 150 years of new beetles in publications of the Entomological Society of Canada. The Entomological Society of Canada was founded in Toronto in 1863. This is pretty old for North American standards. It's young, I guess, for when you compare with European societies, but this is one of the oldest scientific societies in North America. So it's open for all students and lovers of entomology. And here on the left, you have the logo that includes an insect called ice crawler, if you don't know that one. So the Society has been publishing The Canadian Entomologist since 1868 continuously, and it also published a couple of other journals and monographs since then. Those have stopped. And so at the bottom left, you have the first issue of The Canadian Entomologist and then examples of the other two publications as well. I should mention that the Entomological Society of Canada is older than Canada itself. Canada was started as a country only in 1867. So yeah, the society is older than Canada. So in 2018, we decided to celebrate the sesquicentennial anniversary of the Canadian Entomologist. And so, as I mentioned, it was published since 1868. And so myself and Adam Brunke, Anthony Davies, Hume Douglas, Andrew Smith, and Juliana, who was a student working with us, we decided to highlight the contributions of Coleoptera in these publications. We wanted to find out how many new beetles were described, where the beetles were from, who described them, and where did the taxonomists work from. So we did this by first looking into the zoological record data set. We only had these three fields, 1, 2, 3 here. And in the second, we had the name of the publication. And the third, we just changed to find out all that we could find about new taxa that were described on beetles in these publications. And so we extracted everything and looked at a full data set of these publications in EndNote, which is a bibliographic software. We cleaned it all up, and so this served as sort of the raw data. And then we extracted from those publications different data for the different taxonomic ranks. And so the top one is a table in Excel from species group names. And so we looked at the classification, the name of the taxa, who described them, where were the new species groups from. And so we looked at the name-bearing types and their location for those data and where who described them. And so we had to separate the columns for further analysis later on regarding who described what and what was the publication name that we were dealing with here. At the bottom, you have a similar table for genus group names. And we did this also for the family group names, and those were included as supplementary files in our paper. In terms of results, we found that new beetles were described in almost 500 articles over the 150 years of these publications, and the numbers were 2,200 species groups, 136 genus groups, and 7 family group names that were established in these publications. Here in the graph, you have the number of new taxa described by decade. And so I mentioned that 1868 was the start of these publications, but the new beetle taxa didn't start being established in these publications until the 1890s. And then there was a big upswing in the early 1900s, a crash during the Second World War. It picked up again, but then more recently, we've had fewer and fewer new taxa of beetles described in these publications. And we attributed this to the emergence of taxonomically centered publications like Zootaxa and Zookeys. What else did we find out? Well, the staphylinids were the most popular, followed by curculionids, chrysomelids, scarabs, carabids, and so on. And so I should have mentioned that the white bars are the species group names, gray bars genus group names, and the black bars are the family group names. And so you can see that over the last 150 years, those first few groups are the most popular ones in terms of taxonomy in these publications, although a large number of families were covered. And then the origin of these new taxa, so they were mostly from the USA, Canada, and Mexico, with smaller numbers from a lot of other countries. But so it was basically a good place to describe new beetles from North America, including Mexico, Canada, USA. In terms of who described them, we found that there were 165 authors that described new beetle taxa over the last 150 years. And so in the table here, we have 26 taxonomists who have described the most. And so they described 20 species or more each. In terms of the top 5, you had Bill Brown with nearly 300 new taxa, Milt Campbell, Thomas Casey, H.C. Fall, and Alish Smetana. So these were the top 5, but for each of the 26 of the taxonomists that described at least 20 species, we had a little biography about them. And so, for example, Bill Brown, the number 1 here, he was born in the USA, in Nebraska. He came over to Canada and was a predecessor here in this position at the Canadian National Collection of Insects, Arachnids, and Nematodes. So he arrived in 1927. He worked on several different groups of beetles and served as an editor of the Canadian Entomologist for a few years, and then retired here in Ottawa and passed away in 1977. And so we wanted to highlight those people who were our predecessors, but also there were a number of people who were our collaborators and our mentors in this list. And unfortunately, some of them passed away since the publication of our little paper. The top one is Don Bright. On the left, you have Milt Campbell. On the left, you have Milt Campbell. On the right, you have Terry Irwin. And at the bottom, Alish Smetana. And so it was really nice to highlight their great contribution in these publications while they were alive. And unfortunately, they've passed since. So these authors, these taxonomists, were from institutions that were mostly in the USA, Canada, and more recently, China. But as you remember, a lot of new taxa were described from Mexico, but there were relatively few taxonomists from Mexico who were describing the fauna from that country, unfortunately. In terms of illustrations, the ones that we've seen on the right-hand side there were from the publication, and they were by Jessica Schung. She was a relatively new artist, and we wanted to get to know her better, and so she helped us illustrate 3 species that were described in these publications. The first one on the left is Ontophagus species, described by Bill Brown the same year that he was hired here. And this is a species that is associated with prairie dog burrows in the USA. In the middle, you have this Valdivioides ashworthy species of Staphylinnidae described by Alish Smetana from Valdivian rainforests of Chile. And this one is pretty unique and has puzzled the taxonomists ever since. And on the right, you have a species of Calligrapha. This is a cornus-feeding leaf beetle described from Canada. And still to this day, it's only known from Canada, and one of the few species only known from Canada still. Jessica, I was really happy to have gotten to know her. We worked together recently. I thought I'd show you this nice illustration from Jessica. And it was used on the cover of a new publication that came out earlier this year on the status of type genera and Coleoptera. And this is a beautiful species of weevil. It's called the Brazilian diamond beetle, and it's the type species of the Entomys, the type genus of family group names that are used as valid in beetles right now. So I've continued to work with Jessica as well. And in conclusion, the Canadian entomologists, and associated publications were an important outlet for taxonomic papers on Coleoptera in the last 150 years. And you could see trends of in the rate of publications of these taxonomic papers that changed over time, including a decline recently due to the emergence of journals like Zootaxa and Zookeys. And then a large number of coleopterists, mostly from the USA and Canada, published their findings in these publications. And it was at the same time a timely celebration of the contribution of our mentors and collaborators, because a number of them have passed since. So the question that I have for you, the council and the members, is whether we should do something similar for the octogentennial celebration of the Coleopterist Bulletin. In 2027, the Coleopterist Bulletin will be 80 years old. And so you can see the first issue there on the left from April of 1947. So both the Society and the journal had their birthday in 1947, and so we could potentially publish one or more papers to honor the past contributions in the journal or in associated publications as well. And at the bottom here, this is a message or a question for Andrew, Art, and Paul. I know you've been working hard on Bocus. I don't know when the publication date is, but if it hasn't been published before, then 2017 might be a good target so that it could be part of the octogentennial celebration of the Society, since the Society is involved in the production of these volumes. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to meeting you at the meeting, and you can contact me by email at any time. Thank you.